we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. This is the BioFi Community of Practice. I'm Samantha Power, one of the co-founders and the director of the BioFi project. And the purpose of the BioFi Community of Practice, for those of you that are joining us for the first time today, is to cultivate and support a global community of practitioners who are designing, capitalizing, implementing, and evolving bioregional financing facilities through peer-to-peer learning and coordination. I put that in the chat in case you want to give it a closer read. And as many of us in this community are engaged in bioregional financing facility design or design of other financial and economic interventions and experiments aiming to catalyze regenerative economic flows, we see that much of the success of this design work is rooted in the strength of relationships and the culture and trust that they are embedded in. Human relationships and relationships between humans and the more than human life in the places where we live. And finance, we've seen, can be a tool that can help strengthen these relationships and their co-creative potential, or it can show us where there's fragility in the system. We often see this fragility in situations of financial scarcity, but also where too much money is introduced too quickly and there's not yet alignment on vision and sequencing. In the rapidly unfolding meta-crisis context we find ourselves in today, we at the BioFi Project believe the ability to engage in relational economics and relational finance experiments at the small group or community level is foundational for all the work we do that builds on top of that. And so today we've decided to bring in our friend, Zev Friedman, who is the founder and director of Cooperate WNC, which stands for Western North Carolina, which is the bioregion that Tyler and I have recently relocated to. And it's the bioregion where Zev has lived for most of his life. Zev will discuss real-life examples of relational economics of different flavors and at different scales. Zev lives at a very cool eco-village on the south side of Asheville called Earth Haven. It's a long-running eco-village, I believe something like 34 years. Zev, you can correct me later if I got that wrong. And Zev has been there for 15 years. He's worked as an agroecology and permaculture educator, consultant, and as a facilitator. And today he will share about his experience participating in and nurturing a relational economics ecosystem in the broader Western North Carolina region. He'll explore practices he and his colleagues have learned about and are experimenting with through Cooperate WNC's mutual aid and cooperative economics network. He'll talk about community savings and loan pools, cooperative bulk purchasing, and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. So with that, Zev, I hand it over to you. We're so excited for this conversation today.
Awesome. Thanks, Samantha, for that generous introduction. And I'm going to take my glasses off so you all can see my eyes. And going along with that, just an invitation to anybody who isn't on screen, if you'd consider coming on screen. Speaking of relationality, this helps me as like a facilitator and presenter to stay connected feeling with y'all and read the room a little bit and see how everybody's faces are responding and back up if we need to slow down and stuff like that. So thanks for considering that. Yeah. And yes, I'm really grateful to be here. Samantha, Tyler, thanks so much for trusting me to bring me into this community that you've put so much effort into growing. And thanks to all of you for trusting and being open for the experiment of spending a little bit of time together with me today. And like Samantha was speaking to, I want to say a little bit about where I'm coming from, and also as a lead in to like one of the first themes that I want to explore. So Samantha mentioned that I used to work in permaculture and agroecology, doing kind of consulting and education in those things, and they're still very much a part of my life. But after doing that for 12 years, I began to recognize that the approach that I was using and a lot of my colleagues and other people in those permaculture and agroecology worlds were using, the approach wasn't leading to the desired effect. It wasn't creating the kind of impact that a lot of us thought it was going to be creating. You know, permaculture started in the 80s with Bill Mollison, David Holmgren in Australia, and agroecology has been going called that way since the 70s, mostly coming from indigenous practices. But in terms of its ability to really impact the land stewardship and human settlement patterns and the cultural and economic and ecological destiny of our species, it wasn't adding up to the desired effect. And this is about 2016, and I'll share more about kind of how I came to that belief that it wasn't having the desired effect. But the point I want to make in this moment is that I began at that moment in around 2016 when I gathered a bunch of feedback from my past students and clients, people who had contracted with me to do land stewardship, you know, permaculture designs for their properties and so on. I'd worked with hundreds of landowners and stuff, and I did this follow-up survey where I asked everybody, how's it going with all of your land projects and with your communities and your farming projects? And what I discovered was that less than half of the people who had hired me to do design work consulting with them on their land still even lived on or owned the properties. And all these things had happened in their lives. Their marriages had fallen apart. They had decided they hated farming. They had gone to grad school. They had moved to take care of their aging parents. They had moved to get their children closer to a certain school. Somebody had gotten really sick and they weren't able to take care of the land project because it had been a nuclear family and there wasn't backup once somebody got sick, you know, all these different things. But the common theme that I ended up drawing from that was that, in fact, there weren't the cultural and economic and relational support systems for them to actually carry out these long-term land projects, that we were coming up with these 150-year visions for these sophisticated agroforestry, climate resilient systems and everything, but that the people didn't actually have the systems that we needed to take care of those systems. Those are intergenerational projects. And what about healthcare? And what about childcare? And what about livelihood and sense of purpose? And what about so many things? And so in that moment, I began to change what I call my theory of change. And I want to open that up for a second to make sure that that's a term that everyone's familiar with. Theory of change is something that Samantha and Tyler and I have talked about a lot too. Like, does someone want to come off mute and raise your hand and say how you think about theory of change, how you would define that for us?
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you.
Um, so whatever I do, usually there is some reason for why I do this. And these are assumptions, my assumptions of how the world is structured, the world around me is structured, and the context in which I move. So I do have some assumptions of why some things are working and why not. And this is what's called the theory of change. And we all have them for what we're doing. And it's great to know what it is and to become aware of what it actually is.
Oh, thank you. I love that. Exactly. That I really especially want to underline that piece you said, that we all have one, and it's great to be explicit about what it is. I think that's true, that humans inherently have theories of change, whether that's like, how does a romantic relationship work? And how do we actually learn to take care of each other? Or how do I work with my parents and get to know them better in the end of their life? Or how do I change the property zoning practices in the town that I live in? Or how do we impact climate change in a meaningful way? Those are all theories of change, and we're all acting them out every day in different ways. But by making them explicit, what we think needs to change in the world around us, how we think change most effectively happens, what my role then is in that most effective way for change to happen. By making that explicit, we can actually test it out and be like, how's that going? Are my actions having the desired effect that I said I was trying to have with my actions? And then I can take feedback, and then I can refine my theory of change and maybe have even more effective actions. So by making that explicit, right, we can actually develop, I think, more effective ways of being in the world, whether that's in personal relationships, family and community dynamics, bioregional and ecological change, world change, all these things that can make it more explicit. So I'm bringing that to bear here, and I'm going to tell another little piece of the story about how my theory of change changed. But to say that in terms of economics and this, like the title relational economics of this time together, a lot of that for me is about the process of how we get where we say we're wanting to go. Like, it doesn't matter that much to me if we can just describe the end state that we think we want, if we don't have a believable process to get there, right? It kind of doesn't, that's like a fantasy. If we describe some end state without a meaningful process of how to get there, then I don't think that's a very empowered way to proceed. So a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about today, and like what the kind of tongue-in-cheek title of the session was about, like a bunch of things that don't work and a few hints about things that might work, is about process. It's about like what are the little step-by-step and conditional processes that actually let us develop relational economics from where we are now, right? From where we are now, which is painful. That actually takes a lot of grieving and mourning in a lot of ways to even acknowledge and name and describe where we are now, right? That's a deeply painful thing. To describe it in a blanket way, not that everybody fits into this, but where we are now is in a deeply fragmented world where most of us who had any kind of land-based ancestral life way and networks of trust and care, most of that has been totally shredded by industrial economics and war and genocide and ecocide, and the systems that took literally thousands of years to develop, kind of biocultural systems and economies. Those systems, just like topsoil, right? Topsoil takes hundreds or thousands of years to accumulate, and only cutting a forest down and letting it get all the soil washed away once for it to be gone, and then it takes thousands of years more to accumulate, right? So that's kind of the situation that we're in from my perspective, is we're in a deeply denuded cultural and economic and relational system. Most of us were born into a very low trust environment, so that we just think in our bodies that that's the way it feels like to be human, is to be in distrustful conditions where we have to control things and people and negotiate and bargain, or perhaps use subtle forms or overt forms of coercion to get our needs met, right? That's kind of the reality that we were born into. And without having a lived experience of what I'm going to call a nurturance-based system feels like, it's hard to even imagine. So this is interesting because a lot of my work now is at the like intersection between the human nervous system and economics. It's like, how do we get ourselves to trust each other well enough to do relationship-based economics, right? How do we actually get ourselves to trust each other? And we can't do that. A key insight is it doesn't work to just say that we trust each other. Trust is a thing that happens in the body. And if we overestimate how much trust we feel for each other, and then put ourselves in a situation with higher pressure than the trust can take, what happens is that system breaks down along the fault lines of the trust and it falls apart. And then we've wasted a huge amount of resource and energy on that. So that's happened with many cooperative land projects, eco villages, alternative currencies, all kinds of stuff, right? Maybe y'all have all experienced this kind of thing. we long to have more trust than we do have. We commit ourselves to projects that are more ambitious or sophisticated than the level of trust can support. And then at the crucial moment when the pressure is on, then the thing breaks along those trust fault lines. So we'll get into that more because that's related to these specific list of relational economic practices that Samantha listed at the beginning, and which I want to get to and go through. But I want to take a pause and just see, does anyone have anything that feels like an important comment or question to make or share at this moment? Mm-hmm.
I'm probably the oldest person here, and I would say that I grew up. I'm a baby born in '46, so I'm going to be 80 in a couple of weeks.
Awesome.
Um,
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to in my life envision the end and accomplish it. And I must say, I was part of the extractive, industrialized system that you're describing. But it does. I think that there's a benefit to trusting your vision enough to be able to hold it.
Right.
And I just wanted to mention that
Mm.
that there's a way that is something that you talked about trust,
Yeah.
that we need to have trust in our own internal vision for a living Earth. Because I also grew up with falling in love with the Earth in the '60s,
Mm.
and so I've been both an industrial developer as well as an environmentalist and supporting indigenous folks all over. That's a long story, but
Yeah.
just I wanted to bring that to the fore, that the trust of a vision that you hold and that Samantha and Tyler hold is really, really critical and important.
Mm. Mm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. So what's the role of vision in all of this? And I like to think about it in biological metaphors a lot. I think the metaphors that we use to describe all of this matter a lot. And like a lot of design processes, like a lot of the permaculture design that's happened, or uh, even sustainable building design, and even sometimes people talking about like alternative economics or whatever, it uses more of like a, I would call it a blueprint metaphor, right? In a blueprint, when you're designing a building, you lay out to a T, this is how this building is going to be, this is exactly where everything's going to be, right? And then you take the materials from the earth and refine them using industrial processes and put that building into place exactly like that blueprint. And then it begins degrading from the moment it's built because it's not alive, right? All the materials start falling apart. In a living system, like say an oak tree, well, we kind of know what an oak tree is going to look like, right? So we might say like that's a good place for an oak tree to grow. Good soils for it. We know we want acorns. We're going to have chickens and pigs that are going to eat those acorns. There's a life cycle for it, right? But we don't know how every branch is going to grow. But we know what an oak tree might space it might fill, and then we can plant an acorn, and then it's going to grow, and the exact way the roots are going to grow and the exact way the branches are going to go are going to respond to the environment and what's around it, right? So that's maybe where I sit with vision. It's like, let's be able to envision, some of these end states. Are we trying to grow an oak tree or a mulberry tree? I'm using metaphors, right? Of course, for the different kinds of economic or social systems that we might want. But then how do we let that be responsive to the environment, to what's living there already, to the soil conditions? So maybe we could call that emergent design. Or a mentor of mine, Dan Palmer, who's an ancestor now from Australia, called it living design process. And there's some amazing stuff online if anyone wants to check that out. Living design process. He was a permaculture designer and was really working with how do we have design be following a more emergent relational form. Cool. Thanks, Robert. So, all right, I want to tell another story here. So in 2016 was a very pivotal year for me. It was the year I did that survey I was telling y'all about, and where of my past clients and students and stuff. And it was also the year that Donald Trump got elected in the U.S. the first time, and a lot of us were like, "What are we gonna do?" And I began thinking a lot about collective power in that, year. The phrase collective power is a meaningful one to me. It means like the ability of a group of people at any scale to determine our own destiny. That's the way I define it, right? And right now, I think in a way, maybe one of the most insidious aspects of the industrial economy is a lack of a sense of collective power. That a lot of us have a sense that we are kind of inescapably caught up in systems that are taking us in a direction that we don't consent to. Yeah. But which we just can't figure out what to do about it. And so that's a profoundly unhealthy place for the human nervous system to be in. It's one thing to feel a lack of power for a short amount of time, you dealing with an avalanche, or like you ran out of food in the winter or something. It's another thing to live in a permanent, decades long state of feeling like we're on a train that we didn't consent to being on and we don't know how to get off, right? So I'm calling that like the making of collective power. And I really experienced that in 2016 of like, all right, all this permaculture and agroecology stuff isn't adding up to collective power. How do we actually develop collective power? And that means like influence over our own destiny in all the ways and at all the scales, economically, socially, healthcare. How do we actually have dignified end of life for elders? How do we have healthy environments for kids to grow up in? How do we get to choose how we build our buildings and grow our food? How do we deal with self-governance? How do we deal with militaries and violence and state power? Like all of those things are a part of collective power. And it's a big nut to crack. But it turns out that we're not the first people who've been thinking about this or trying to deal with it. And in fact, especially the most recent people are indigenous people who've dealt with colonization forces from European colonizers. And so I was down in Mexico. I went down to Mexico in December of 2016 with a colleague of mine, Justin Holt, who's still a friend and now a colleague in Cooperate WNC. And we were researching milpa farming. Anyone here know milpa farming? Cool. You want to speak to it, Javier? Maybe? Would you be willing? Just to briefly bring that word in. I'm wondering if you're in a place
Hi,
people farm
everyone.
milpa. Hi. Yeah.
Yes, we are actually just preparing the milpa right now here in Mexico, and they use a system where they dig a hole and they put three seeds together, which is the three berries they call it. Or so they put the corn, they put the pumpkin, and they put the beans
Yes.
together, and they support each other.
Yes. Thank you. What part of Mexico
And
are
this,
you in?
of course, yeah, in Quintana Roo, in la península de Yucatán.
Ah, gotcha. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. So yeah, this is the way that I learned about milpa farming many years ago and from some teachers and mentors of mine. And we've been farming kind of that way up here in Appalachia, corn, beans, and squash, but also many other plants, quelites and tobacco and cotton and other plants that all grow in this like mixed polyculture. And we were down there studying milpa agriculture and visiting indigenous farmers who we had made relationships with who were still doing the kind of old way of farming. And we went to this one place in Oaxaca, about an hour north of Oaxaca City, in the Mixteca. Mixtec are a people, they're cousins of the Zapotec people who are more known, and it's a region of Oaxaca. And it was a village called Yucuyoko. There's a book by and about these folks called Milpa From Seed to Salsa. If any of you want to check it out, it's a very fascinating book all about their indigenous culture and farming system and ways of cooking and medicine. So we were visiting them, and while we were there, we were walking around, and we came around the bend. It was in the mountains, and there were these two young men who were building a greenhouse, and they this big, huge greenhouse. And we were like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "Oh, we're building this greenhouse to expand our tree planting program." And we're like, "Oh, tell us more." And they're like, "Yeah, we've been reforesting this area because when the Spanish conquistadors came, they cut down all of our forests, and hundreds of thousands of acres of forests all around here. All the mountains were denuded. You could look around the mountains and there was huge erosion gullies in the mountains from being deforested. So these folks, we talked to them some more, and they said, yeah, last year we planted 700,000 trees to reforest our desertified landscape, and they're planting these two species of trees, a type of pine and a type of alder. And they took us over to this spot close by where they had planted these trees 27 years earlier, and there was like bare limestone where they hadn't planted the trees, and then the forest, no soil on the limestone, and then I stuck my arm into topsoil that had been created in 27 years through this intensive tree planting using the alders, which are nitrogen fixing trees, so they do a lot of soil creation quickly. And they were like, yeah, we're doing this, and then we'll grow these for 40 years, and then we'll harvest the pines to build our houses, and the alders we do all this other stuff with, and then we'll grow milpa there for 10 years, and then we'll grow nopales and agave there for 15 years, and then we'll plant trees again. So it was actually a 65-year rotational cycle, agroforestry cycle that was integrating milpa and agroforestry and creating huge amounts of topsoil, climate resilient. And I was first, my mind was blown by this, but then I was like, how are you paying for all of this? These were just like these seemingly low wealth indigenous folk living way out in the country. And they're like, oh, we have this cooperative financing system where everybody from the villages, it's 12 villages, and we all pool money, and then we choose together these large projects to invest in. The greenhouses are the most current project. We also do things with water systems and community buildings, or replacing roofs on old people's homes when they need it, all this stuff. And that blew my mind. Like, it wasn't financed through Bill Gates. It wasn't financed through some big nonprofit or through some international carbon trading scheme. It was financed through these indigenous working class folks pooling money and then financing this thing through their own collective wisdom, doing all the work with collective labor, and doing a far more effective agroforestry project than anything in the States I've come in contact with, right? So when I heard about that, and then they started telling me, and some of this is written about in the book too, about how many of their youth stay in the villages versus leaving, which is a huge thing in indigenous villages around the world, right? It's the youth leaving to urban areas, but they have a really high youth retention rate to train and get specialized technical skills. They pay for it together, and then the youth come back and live in the village and bring those skills back, and on and on and on. Turns out they have this whole anatomy of cooperation in their village, 12 different words for specific cooperative institutions that are the lifeblood of their village. And they say that's how they survived the conquistadors, is this cooperative culture with a really specific anatomy of cooperative practices and what I would call mutual aid practices. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is like what we need to do back in the States. And this is maybe the step that we're missing, because I've been working in permaculture and stuff, and it's, over 90% of the people are doing this nuclear family thing, which God bless us, we're doing the best we can, but it's like, it's just impossible. Humans did not evolve or emerge as nuclear family species. We come in clans and like extended families, and the things we can do through that collaboration and intergenerational knowledge transfer and sharing risk and sharing wealth and dealing with emergencies, like that's just how we work, that's how we survive. And then I started reading up about the history of mutual aid in the United States and around the world, and about cooperatives. And this is what led me to founding Cooperate WNC, which is the work I now do. I'll actually go ahead and put that in the chat for anyone who wants to check it out. And that is a nonprofit in Western North Carolina. It's like 22 counties of North Carolina. It's about a quarter of the state of North Carolina, so it's a big area. And we're in a long-term project of figuring out what it means to grow a regional mutual aid and cooperative economic network. Something like what they were doing in the Mixteca with Yuku Yoko. Bigger than a single watershed, bigger than a single town. but small enough to be accountable to the people who are members of it, which is a key piece of collective power, right? Is that whatever institutions we create for collective power are deeply accountable to and owned by the people who are members of it. So I want to just pause there before I open up another big piece and see any comments or questions arising.
I see, Zev, that Stephen is asking if there's a link to the book
Oh,
that you mentioned.
I don't have a link right now, but it's called, I'll write it in here.
Okay, great.
Milpa seed, or I could run downstairs and get it even and show you. It's got great photographs too, that book, and it's half in English, half in Spanish.
Mm.
All right, anything else before we keep on trucking? Okay, Sheila.
Yeah, I put in the chat a book by Antonella Sansone, and the title is about human connection from before birth.
Yeah.
Since we're dealing with humans here and our mammalian specific need for secure and trustworthy environments, that begins with the previous generation.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Right. That's like that thing of if we gestate in the womb of a mother who's living in, you know, what I call the violence syndrome, the thing that we're all in the middle of that only knows how to use coercion and violence. We pick that up epigenetically through the hormones, through the nervous system patterns that are happening in her body and the bodies of the other people around us. And then we think that that's what it feels like.
It's actually a wisdom behavior to adapt in the womb to what your mother's world is. But we don't need that restrictive behaviors and patterns often when we mature, but we're imprinted with them.
Thank you.
And there's also within the embryonic developmental stages, there's intelligence, innately intelligent behaviors that you have before you have a functioning brain. So we know how to get through crises.
Yeah. Right. And that getting through crises is kind of what that constant emergency is kind of what our entire society and global society is designed around. In my estimation, it's a constant emergency, right? That's a great doorway opening into the next place I was going to take us, which is, so we called this session relational economics. I think that's a more accessible term, a term I use in the privacy of my own heart for what I'm trying to achieve with this personally is nurturance economics. Because and then the as compared to in a lot of literature, like we have relational economics contrasted with transactional economics. I think that is useful terms, but I'm going to say nurturance economics versus coercive economics, because I feel that that gets to the root of what we're talking about here a little more, because it is about nervous systems and trust. See, I want to dig into trust a little bit here, and then highlight how different levels of trust provide for the different types of nurturance economics, and then go into the examples that I've practiced in my own life, and we'll talk about those. The thing is that the way that I experience this is that, and I spoke to it earlier, is that coercion economics, the one that we're all familiar with, it doesn't rely on consent and it doesn't rely on power sharing, right? Industrial capitalism, nobody who's being impacted by the bad end of the stick of industrial capitalism is consenting to that. People aren't consenting to the coal mines. They aren't consenting to the factories. They aren't consenting to the disproportionate labor economy between China and the US. They aren't consenting to all of these things. It's being done to them and to us, I'll say. And then that scales to many other scales. And so in that form, trust isn't required because it's an implicit property of it that things are being done to each other, Coercion economics is the ones with more power just do what they want. That's how it's set up, right? In nurturance economics, we're saying, like, what does it look like to actually have something where people are truly consenting to what happens to us and what's done with our labor and the places that we live, and where power is shared in meaningful ways. What that means is that if power is shared in meaningful ways, that it means that, you don't have to beg me to stop doing something hurtful to you. You actually have structural power to stop me from doing something hurtful to you. That's real power sharing, right? And so it's very difficult for us to imagine, I think. It certainly is for me, even as much as I've been playing with this stuff. It's difficult to imagine, wow, what would that be like to actually be in economies where we are consenting to what was happening? And what I would say to y'all is, yeah, it's going to probably take us hundreds of years to get there if we survive as a species, right? Back to the theory of change. I think that we actually can't envision right now what that will look like. I don't think that we're capable of envisioning in detail what that will look like. I think we can envision some things, and we can envision what, and I'm going to use the word experiments. I like to use the word experiments a lot, right? We can envision next steps that give us a taste of what this type of theory of change leads to. And then we take feedback, and then we can maybe design something a little more substantial, get some feedback from that. And we actually become more and more able to imagine it as we have cycles of action and reflection with it. So that, and this goes right along with trust making. And maybe some of you are familiar from the like romantic relationship literature. There's this thing called from the Gottman Institute. They identified rupture and repair. Y'all know, anyone here familiar with that and want to say anything about it for a moment? Sheila?
Yeah, rupture and repair happens when things move too fast, trauma happens. It isn't so much what happens, it's how it's handled, and it can always be repaired, always.
Right. And so, but a key insight of the Gottmans, they have the Gottman Institute, is that couples don't trust each other because nothing bad happens. Couples trust each other because hurtful things happen, and then they do repair. That's what creates trust in the human nervous system, is having people get hurt, and then we signal to each other, hey, I'm sorry I hurt you, I'm still here. That experience is what actually creates trust in our nervous systems. And that just like in romantic couples or close friendships or family, if nobody's ever getting hurt, that probably means that nobody's taking any emotional risks. It probably means that nobody is putting that much on the line or being that vulnerable, which means not that much real intimacy. So if nobody's getting hurt, it probably means we're not actually going that deep or getting that interdependent with each other. And it also means we're not creating the place where risk and rupture and repair can happen and real trust can get made. But then, and Sheila said, you can repair anything. And I think that's true, but some things are really hard to repair. Sometimes if we go too far too fast, if we go beyond, I'm going to introduce a word here, titration. And titration is a word from chemistry. It's like where instead of dumping two chemicals together, you drip in a little bit at a time, and it makes a more complete reaction. It's a useful emotional relational concept. So titration says that rather than dumping, maybe you all have experienced like feeling like you got too vulnerable in a relationship too quickly, or that somebody else got too vulnerable too quickly, faster than it really felt like the trust supported, right? That's like not titration. Titration is when we pay attention, like how much can this relationship absorb right now? How much risk can we take? And then we take those risks. But if we risk too big too fast, that creates blowback. I think that happens a lot in people who are trying to create kind of alternative culture, regenerative culture too, is because we all are longing for, trust-based, land-based, life-giving community. We're like, let's just do it all right now. But that's not how our nervous systems work, right? And most of us do have a lot of trauma, and we have very valid reasons why we don't trust each other immediately to those depths. Totally valid reasons. So instead, the way that trust gets made in a group of people, and I'm going to extrapolate it out now from the like romantic and family constellations now to collaborative projects, because that's really what I'm wanting to focus on and what I think we're talking about today. Collaborative projects. If we can learn to assess how much trust is currently existing in a group of people, and this is a qualitative thing mostly, not a quantitative thing, but there are some ways that I can share about and also follow up with you all about if we don't have time today, of really doing this in a concrete way, even if it is qualitative. There are ways to get a good sense of how much trust is in a group, and then design experiments that ask everybody to risk more than we have been, but not too much more. Then we can get a cycle of risk, rupture, repair, where people get to experience each other risking, maybe some ruptures happen, and then we get to do the repair, which then creates more trust, which is like topsoil. Trust is like topsoil for relationships. And then now we design another experiment that asks a little bit more of us and has a little more risk. And by the way, each of these, the greater risk correlates with greater collective power, right? The riskiest things are what create the most collective power. They tend to, because it's us pooling more resources. It's us sacrificing a little bit more individual autonomy to the collective intelligence, because we say, I trust this collective enough to be intelligent together, right? It's putting land power over land together, power over decision making, right? So the greater risks are greater collective power. So this is a theory of change, where what I'm saying is, with relational economics or nurturance-based economics, let's scope out, here are a bunch of different types of activities that are kind of in the DNA, the seed jar, if you will. Here's the different kinds of seeds that we could plant in a given group of people, or a given bioregion, or a given cluster, like an eco-village or a neighborhood block in a city, or a different cooperative group that you have, a business or a nonprofit. Here's some different seeds that you could plant, some different relational economic activities. Now let's look at what the trust currently is in the group. Now let's design some next experiments that are based on titration and risk and rupture repair for, inviting us into deeper risk and deeper collective power. And then over time, we develop greater and greater capacity to take greater and greater risks and develop more collective and transformational power. And I'm just looking at the chat. Sheila wrote, prenatal psychology and science holds that womb ecology becomes world ecology, change birth, and the world changes. Oh, right. Yeah, I think that was from our earlier section of the conversation. Robert saying, you like the image of transformation from the caterpillar to the butterfly. The caterpillar becomes mush or compost from which the imaginal cells create the butterfly. Yeah, no way the caterpillar imagined the butterfly, but the process works anyway. Yeah, it's really cool to think about, what are the imaginal cells in human culture. I always like to kind of ask questions and metaphors like that, right? It's also, and then Grace said, it's also about individual and cultural capacity to handle different types of rupture. That's huge. Yeah. So, and the fact is that in a group of people, usually not all the people are going to have the same capacity to handle rupture, right? And then this is a key thing though, that by talking about it in this way, and by being able to describe different levels of emotional system capacity and trust in a group, we actually can make hard choices about group membership. Or here's a way of doing it. We can say, it's not a way of barring people from a group if you don't have capacity, but we say, hey, we did this whole assessment all together. And it seems like from what you shared, like maybe you don't have capacity to take the kinds of risks that the group wants to take quite yet, but we'd like for you to be close and to be involved when you do have that capacity. How could we support you in developing that capacity? Right? So there are ways of actually creating on-ramps for people who aren't yet ready to participate at the level of risk a group is ready to go to, because otherwise you end up limiting the scope of the work of your group to the capacity of the lowest member, the lowest capacity member of the group, right? So how can we acknowledge that and either make that decision consciously, okay, we're going to move at the pace of the person with the lowest capacity in the group, and we're making that decision explicitly, or we're not going to do that, and how do we do that in a compassionate, inclusive way that provides for personal transformation, right? So that this starts to actually chart out different relational development pathways related to the economics, right? I'm going to pause here before going deeper. Any questions or comments?
How much consciousness it needs to be in the facilitators, for example, or those that are building this community of practice about their own shadow work?
So much. So much. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so one of the practices, one of the tools that we've created for, we have this program called the Kinship Program in Cooperate WNC, which is a group of relationally oriented mutual aid organizers, and we're like it's like a fellowship program. And one of the things that we're asking them to do is called a community trust self-assessment. It's actually first I sit down and do a bunch of self-reflective work on how do I think other people trust me? Are there any ways that I think other people don't trust me? Are there any areas that I have some kind of doubt or question about? And then I do some relationship mapping. Who are some close people to me whose opinion or perspective I would really value, who I could ask for feedback about that? And then I'll go ask those people specifically, like, would you be willing to have a conversation with me about like how you see me and how you think I'm trustable, or what blind spots I might have? And then I have those conversations. And so that starts to highlight some of those shadow areas, some of those blind spots and things that have not been made conscious. And then those are become explicit areas of growth as we're then designing a group dynamic in this group to say each person gets to articulate their own personal growth goals as part of the group process, and get to say to the group, hey, if you see me doing this, here's a way you could give me feedback on that I would be able to receive, right? And I'll go ahead and say with that there's a whole body of practice then called relational organizing and conflict transformation, which are really related to this. I see you, Ka. I'll call on you in a second. I hope I pronounced your name right. That's all about this. It's all about, in a dedicated group of people that's in a long-term project together, how do we really work from relationships, really work from trust in very concrete ways, and set up what's called a conflict transformation system, where it's anticipating that there's going to be conflict, because conflict is a natural human activity and an essential part of human culture. And then it's set up to harness the energy of that conflict to transform us, but also to transform underlying power dynamics of the systems that we're embedded in. So it recognizes that when there's conflict, that's, and I'm sure that a lot of people on this call kind of already get this jive, but that when there's conflict, that means it's pointing to deeper roots of things that need to transform and heal in us individually and collectively. But there are ways of setting that up, customized for each group, that are tuned into the traumas and triggers and social positioning of the different people in the group to deliberately catch and store that energy of conflict and use it transformationally. So this is all wrapped up in this work. Cool. Clapping. Awesome. Thanks, Sheila. Let's go to Ka, and please tell me if I did pronounce your name right.
Yes, totally fine. Thank you, Zev.
Yeah.
I am wondering, like, I've heard you speak about what you've learned from indigenous peoples And then I heard you speak about moving on to trust and trust-based, or how we can build trust and a relationship and how important the relationship building is.
Yeah.
Um, did I miss the like what's missing for me, and maybe I missed it in listening.
Mhm.
Like where are you implementing what at the moment that is really working? Like, are you speaking at the moment about things that we could do and then things would get better, or is that something that you're like implementing at the moment and see it
Yeah.
work?
Great. Well, let's go there. That's where I'm going, is to the examples of the things that we have been doing. Yeah. But I just want to pause one more time for questions. Any other questions or comments before we go there? Because we've covered a lot of stuff. Yeah, thanks. There's feels like there's a lot of framing to get to talk about this stuff, in a way that, yeah. All right. And we've got 35 minutes, right? Cool.
That's right. Yep.
Great. So, all right, I have a note to myself. Another concept for anybody who grew up in the 80s that is a funny and useful concept is I like to think about gateway drugs to cooperation. Anyone remember the concept of gateway drugs? It's like marijuana as a gateway drug to, right. Anyway, that's supposed to be funny, but not everybody's laughing. That's okay. So one of the gateway drugs that we are currently doing to cooperative economics is it with Cooperate WNC. It's one of our main programs, is cooperative bulk purchasing. And so cooperative bulk purchasing. Oh, someone says your video is choppy, and what does your hat say? It says herbalista. Should I take it off? No. All right. So cooperative bulk purchasing is a surprisingly deep practice. I first got turned on to it by the Community Purchasing Alliance in Washington, D.C., which is still going. The Community Purchasing Alliance focuses on working with churches and places of worship in the greater DC area. And then they coordinate bulk purchasing of HVAC supplies, utility bills. They actually do bulk purchasing of electricity. They can do that in DC because of the way the utility industry is structured there. Solar panels, so stuff related to energy and buildings and services. And they do about 15 million a year of bulk purchasing amongst, the last time I checked, I think it was like 150 churches. And then they make about 10% profit off of that, which then they use to fund the rest of their cooperative mission, right? So they have like 12 full-time staff doing cooperative development and community organizing in DC. And then they're able to save their members, the members are the churches, millions of dollars a year through bulk purchasing and price negotiations. They're also able to direct the purchasing to value aligned producers, right? Like Black and women owned businesses or utility companies that have higher renewable levels in their portfolios, stuff like that, right? So when you start meddling in the supply chain like this, it's actually a very high leverage place to go, where you can save money for purchasers, you can impact the producers and the landscape of producers, and then you get all the people in the room together. These churches have meetings every year, multiple meetings a year, where people start making relationships and they start to get to know each other and to experience the benefits of cooperation, hence the gateway drug to cooperation piece, right? It starts to get people involved. And that's a pretty low level, speaking in the language of risk rupture repair, it's a pretty low level of personal risk, right? It's not asking a lot of emotional or somatic risk from the people involved to do cooperative bulk purchasing. So we learned about that. I think I took a class with Felipe Witchker, the founder of that, like 6 years ago. And after starting Cooperate WNC in 2018, and And we did a big community listening project in Western North Carolina. We've done 3 of those over the course of our organization, called the Collective Power Listening Project, where we did in-depth interviews. The name of in DC, the organization in DC is the Community Purchasing Alliance, CPA. And we asked people in-depth questions, like found people who are already community organizers around Western North Carolina and did sit downs with them. And one of the themes that came out was that bulk purchasing of food and farming supplies would be some high leverage activities in our situation, which is much different than DC, right? We're in a 22 county rural area. The biggest city is Asheville with 90,000 people, right? So it's a much different situation than DC. And this is a key thing, by the way, key principle of all this nurturance economic stuff is place-basedness. I'm sure this is preaching to the choir here, but what does it mean to be place-based? In my opinion, community interviews are pretty much where the rubber hits the road on place-based design. That means training people who are a member of communities to be the interviewers that then interview other people in the community with well-designed questionnaires and conversation guides that then create insights and themes that are owned by that community of what needs to happen next. And then it also creates more trust in the interview process between the interviewer and the interviewee. That creates a bond between them. So it's actually creating capacity through the interview process. Some of you are probably familiar with asset-based community development, ABCD. I'll just mention that in passing. Really awesome community interview approach based out of the ABCD Institute in Chicago. That's been used for decades by a lot of grassroots community organizers. So we do that, and we got the insight that, okay, thanks, Caroline. Maybe she's already gone. We got the insight that those things were a good purchasing place to start. So we've been doing that, and we talk to farmers and get their input on like, what do you need that you're having trouble getting or getting affordably or getting high quality. So for example, right now we're coordinating a hay purchase, a spray-free hay purchase, where people who are raising sheep and cows and goats are having a hard time getting high quality spray-free hay in Western North Carolina. So we're talking to hay producers and figuring out what it will take to coordinate a bulk grow out and purchase, which also might mean buying some equipment for a couple of them to help them have the equipment they need to do spray-free hay production, right? So it starts to get all up into the production characteristics, and supporting creation of new producer economies is part of bulk purchasing. One thing we did learn from that I'll say as a cautionary note is that getting in, if any of you are considering doing this, which by the way, bulk purchasing is also a huge historic part of mutual aid societies in the United States and abroad. A lot of the Black mutual aid societies that came out of post-slavery all through the US, the first thing that they were doing was bulk purchasing, because it was a way of saving money and getting the things that people needed to start businesses and to farm and provision their households and stuff. But the cautionary note is trying to do diverse food purchasing, like, and maybe some of you know Azure in the US or companies like that, where you can get on a website and order hundreds of different foods bulk, and then pick it up at a pickup point from a tractor trailer. That's a very sophisticated and difficult thing to do. It turns out we're not doing that. What we're doing, what we're focusing on, key tip if you want to try this, is specific foods that we have a relationship with the producer and have specific value to them, so that we can tell that story to our network and support a really value aligned producer. So for example, we're buying this amazing organic olive oil from a small group of producers in Crete, in Greece. And we have this relationship with them, and we get 4 shipments a year of olive oil in and distribute it out to our rural hubs. And by the way, that's another way that it kind of plugs into enhancing cooperation in general, is these hubs. We work with like 15 different locations around Western North Carolina that are mutual aid hubs in different ways. They provide different functions. And then One of those is that they serve as bulk purchasing distribution sites. So we get a big shipment into a warehouse in Asheville, and then we distribute it out to the hubs, and then people come pick up their stuff from the hubs. And then that gets people in those hubs interacting with each other. So it's another way that it begins to create trust and topsoil for other things to happen. Questions or comments on bulk purchasing before I go to the next one?
Can you share how that helped to build trust, or what came up around trust through that experiment?
Well, it's still ongoing.
Yeah.
The bulk purchasing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's like I was just saying. So like I could share a specific story, but so people are meeting each other at hubs when they're doing their pickups, and we have little events at the hubs for the pickups a lot of time where there's like a little social scene. So it's a lightweight way of creating trust. It's not like eye gazing or something. And then people are getting the message from us listening to them that their perspective matters, and they have the experience of collective power because they have input on what purchases we focus on and what producers that we buy from. And then we're creating events where farmers come together to talk about their needs. So it's a way of farmers coordinating and figuring out what shared needs are. I think those are the main ways that it creates trust in the network. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, totally. And then what it has done is it creates an excuse for the hubs themselves to get more organized. So the hubs are usually like a farm or a cooperative land project or a business for them to start thinking of themselves as hubs. And then we start talking about, or as someone wrote, if you have to pay in advance, that also builds a level of trust. And they do. Yeah. We start talking with people, and it's happened a few times where we've offered classes on mutual aid topics or cooperative economic topics at the hub, after they've become a purchasing hub. So it kind of helps them to start to expand their own vision. A specific example of a different way trust has been created is that we're doing this river cane propagation project. Samantha and Tyler know about this, and came and helped out. And the property that it was at, that where we were digging river cane, which is a native bamboo species that's endemic to our area, which is a big part of climate resilience planning and especially flood resilience planning. One of the properties that we were digging rhizomes to propagate from, they were really concerned about us commodifying river cane, and turning that into a commercialized thing where really they're like, this is a deep part of the indigenous people's life way here, the Cherokee people. They have a traditional form of incredible basketry made out of river cane, and it's a part of native ecosystems. And they're like, we really want to make sure this is available to everybody, and that y'all aren't going to be like charging so much money that it's going to make it inaccessible to people. So then we had a long conversation, actually a series of conversations with the folks who were stewarding that land, to address that. And they got to air their concern. They got to feel us, responding to their concern in a meaningful way. And I think that was a trust creating way. So it brings up values, getting into bulk purchasing brings up value level conversations that we can then show up for. And then that creates trust too. So I want to go on to the next one. I'm going to jump to savings pools for the moment, just to make sure we have time. So this is one that is also ongoing, and which I have a high stake in. We're calling them community savings and loan pools, and we learned about this from New Zealand. It's actually from the permaculture community in New Zealand. At last count, there was something like 140 communities. They just call them savings pools in New Zealand, but we're calling them community savings and loans pools to make the title a little bit more descriptive. And what it is it's a grassroots financing tactic, similar in a way to what they're doing in Yoko with the tree planting, where they have a pool and they fund the greenhouses, right? But what it is a group of 15 to 25 people are in a long-term group together, where we get together once a month typically, and everyone puts in savings to a shared account. It can be different levels of savings because everybody's money is tracked separately in a fairly sophisticated spreadsheet system. And then people who are members of the pool put in proposals for 0% interest loans. And so it's a proposal driven loan system. And like in our Earth Haven savings pool, which Cooperate WNC, so the function of Cooperate WNC in this is we help to train people and coach them to get their own savings pools going. A savings pool makes sense to do in person with people who live close to each other because it is such a relational economic thing. I'll talk more about that in a second, how that is. So we've actually saved about $100,000 in our pool in the last 6 years between all of the members. There are currently 16 members. It's been as high as 18. We've had a couple people die. We've had a couple people move away, new people join. And that money has been loaned out multiple times. And there's like a lot of details to how it works and stuff. But the underlying thing is that what happens is every meeting we do a big check-in where we go around in a circle and everybody has like 2 to 3 minutes to do a significant check-in that's focused on money in their life, and it's bringing transparency in to money, which maybe y'all have noticed. And I don't know if this is the same for people who aren't in the US, but in the US, money is like a huge shadow area and thing that people don't want to talk about and don't want to be transparent about. It's like the last refuge. People will way more easily talk about the details of their sex lives and about their finance lives, right? And so we do that. We talk about our financial lives, but especially like the intersection between our personal lives and our financial lives. Like, did somebody's grandmother die and leave them an inheritance? Did someone have a hard mental health month and it impacted how their sole proprietorship business is doing? On and on and on. We talk about those things there. And so we all have a sense of where everybody is at with their life and how that impacts finances. And we act as like a peer mentoring group that way for each other around that. And sometimes people get really vulnerable in there. Thanks, Patricia. And then we talk about various things. We have an agenda, we have facilitator and stuff. And then if there's a proposal for a loan, typically it's like we see it coming. Like me, I just got a $9,000 loan for building a roof on the deck on my house a few months ago. And I brought that to the group 4 months before I actually put the proposal in. Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And started talking to them about it. It was like, hey, y'all, just so you know, I'm thinking about bringing you a proposal. Here's the situation. I've got this builder who's willing to do the work. People started asking me questions. Someone suggested a different builder. Someone was like, oh, what about that wood that got milled last year? Can you use that wood that got milled on the land? So it's like this collaborative process. And then by the time I actually brought the proposal, it wasn't a surprise to anybody. They had already had all their questions, asked and answered, and they just approved the proposal. And now there's not collateral. We don't have collateral in our loans in the Earth Haven savings pool. In some of the New Zealand pools, people do have collateral sometimes, and especially with the big ones, because in New Zealand, some of the pools have gotten big enough that they're buying houses with them. So by the way, that's huge, because any of y'all who have bought a house or looked at buying houses and a mortgage, right? You buy a $300,000 house and you take out a 30-year mortgage, you're going to pay $300,000 more in interest. So if you can buy a house from a savings pool, you're saving $300,000. Yeah, thanks, Robert. So then people can save that money into the pool. So it's a very effective thing, right? But we don't have enough money to be doing that large of loans yet in the Earth Haven pool. We're more doing like $5,000 to $20,000 loans in ours right now. So we don't have collateral, but this is where the trust comes in, right? If I were to default on a loan, like stop paying the loan, these are all these people who I literally live with in the eco village. They would be like, what are you talking about? You're defaulting. Like, no way we're letting you get away with that, right? There's so much relational accountability because we've got all these other kinds of skin in the game together. And that's a kind of a unique thing of an eco village. And it's actually one of the challenges I want to bring in about this. And one of the things about like limitations of trust is that we actually worked with two other groups to get savings pools started. And we worked with four other groups that were investigating getting savings pools started. And the other two that began pools both collapsed within 2 years. And one of those was a Latin American farmers cooperative down south of Asheville. One of them was a Black Men's Business Association in Asheville. And what it came down to is that they didn't have enough skin in the game. They didn't have enough trust with each other to actually continue it and for people to feel good about risking putting enough of their savings into the pool to then be loaning it out, right? Because that's always a decision everyone makes. Like me, I save about $600 a month total out of my total wages. I usually put about $250 a month in the savings pool, right? But some people might only put $50 in the savings pool, and it's hard to build up enough money to do anything meaningful, to have much collective power if you've only got people putting $50 a month in the pool. So you need people to be willing to take higher risks, right? So that's one of these areas where you start to see the really concrete impact of like what trust allows us to do or prevents us, a lack of trust prevents us from doing. And to understand what capacity does it take to do something like start a cooperative savings and loan pool. Well, it takes quite a bit of interdependence, it turns out. And in New Zealand, there's a different culture than in the US. I judge less independence, more defaulting to community consciousness and mutual care kind of built into the culture there. Maybe it has to do with being an island nation. I'm not sure exactly how they got to be that way, but I think there's a higher base level of trust. So they're able to do these pools more effectively with that than we found here, other than in the like rarefied context of Earth Haven. Stop there for a second and take comments and questions.
Maybe Tyler wants to build on this, but I'm curious, Ev, if y'all have considered commitment pooling alongside savings pooling, pooling of one's labor and time.
That's what you mean by commitment is pooling labor and time?
Yeah, here I'm drawing on Will Ruddock and the grassroots economics team's work, but Tyler, maybe you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah, it could be commitments of labor, time, assets, goods, services, anything. And we'll have him and his partner in the work come next month for a deep dive. And I think you'd really enjoy diving into that.
Yeah. So, all right, take the other questions in a second and respond to that first and say, no, I haven't considered that. Although it reminds me of our community service system at Earth Haven, which is the next thing I was going to talk about. So maybe I'll go there after Ka and Patricia. Let's go with Ka then Patricia.
Let's take Patricia first. She hasn't spoken yet.
All right, thanks.
I was wondering if you know the system called Money Pile, Zeph. Which
Yeah.
do you use it?
Well, I have. Yeah. Are you? Did you learn it from Dominic Barter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Awesome. It goes directly into what Samantha was bringing, and it generates more resources than the money itself that it's put there. So I just love it, and I was curious to know if you are familiar, if you use it.
I am. Dominic actually came to Earth Haven about 15 years ago, and he first led Money Piles after a conflict session that he led here, and then I've met him and worked with him some and facilitated Money Piles a few times as in Cooperate WNC activities here. Yeah, it's for everyone. It's a whole thing to talk about there. Really cool thing. Thanks for bringing it. It's, I would say, more radical even than any of this other stuff. And it's interesting too, because it's kind of like, in a way, an exception to the principle I'm bringing about trust, because he facilitates money piles with people who just, met each other at an event or something. Although sometimes, and it came from the work he was doing in Brazil, which was with people in the favelas who actually have a deep biocultural continuity and long-term relationship with each other. So it's interesting to think about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I definitely see that interbeingness in the slums here are easier. Sometimes it's easier to implement those things, but I also have participated in the how do you call the justice circles? Is that what restorative circles of
Yeah.
justice?
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it's that what you use to build trust, but they are very also precise, and I've experienced how can you really go from not trusting at all and not wanting to see that person into rebuilding the connection and even going further. So
Right.
yeah, love it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And it's like, right. And taking those peak experiences of group trust making and taking that as like a doorway and a first step towards the long-term trust making, right? Because I think that's one thing I've experienced is like a group can feel really good after a process, but then what's the long, slow, accumulation of trust through cycles of action over time is a big question, I think, for me. Yeah. Thank you. Let's go to Ka.
Yeah, so my question is, I hear that, and this is the focus of this call, is like regenerative or relational economics. I've been wondering whether there are examples for financing work with the soil and with the earth and with eco restoration.
Well, the savings pools can be used for whatever you want them for. A lot of them in New Zealand are for farming. A lot of them are farmers' savings pool. At Earthaven, our pool is focused on small businesses and buildings, because those were the needs that we identified when we founded our pool. But we've actually ended up financing a lot of regenerative farming projects at Earthaven too. So you can design a savings pool around whatever the set of needs that you identify in your community. It makes a lot of sense to me that it's like doing a community interview process to discern what type of pool and what focus it would have. Yeah. Is that what you're asking? Am I understanding you clearly?
Yeah, kind of a bit. Like, how many people are you in Earthaven?
100.
100. And is it part of a city or is it countryside, rural,
So
or
it's very, very rural.
very rural? So there's nobody else around you and you need to kind of.
We have neighbors, but yeah, it's very rural, and it's a 330-acre property at Earthaven, and then there's neighborhood clusters where the houses are, and farmland and forest land and stuff.
And are the neighbors in any way involved into what you're doing?
Well, the savings pool is optional membership, and we have representatives from different neighborhoods who are in the savings pool. Yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, totally. Yeah, and it seems like the right scale for a savings pool is 15 to 25 people. That's like an archetypal grassroots community organizing scale for what I call pods. There around the world, we find people cluster into that scale. It's kind of how many people you can fit in the large living room or large kitchen of a house. 25 people is about the top limit. And then if you go below 15, it's not enough to have enough, financial critical mass to make a savings pool really work. So I want to go over to the Earthaven Community Service and Alternative Currency System for a moment, and just briefly describe that, and then we'll just like finish out with last questions and discussion. But before I do that, I just want to pause and say, Samantha, Tyler, are we balancing question content well enough for now?
I think so. There's a
Yeah.
question from Michael in the chat
Oh.
that maybe you want to address, and then let's just leave a couple minutes at the end. I have some community announcements I want to make before we wrap.
Gotcha. I'm just reading Michael's comment. Yeah. I'm not sure I totally understand it, but maybe we'll get there. So yeah, Earth Haven, a big question when they founded it in 1994 was, how do we gather enough labor to establish Earth Haven? Because it was like this big forested land with 60-year-old forests on it, no clearings for buildings, for farmland, roads. So they're like, this is going to be a lot of work. And they created a combined, what they ended up doing was creating a combined community service and alternative currency system, which is maybe the longest standing alternative currency in the US, as far as I can find, because it's been there since 1998. And the way that works is everybody does 3 or 4 hours of community service a week. Everybody's required to. And then if we do more than that, we get paid out in the paper currency, which is called a leap. And so what that does is, unlike alternative currencies that aren't anchored in community service, it creates an incentive structure for people to participate in the alternative currency, right? A lot of alternative currencies, I think, flounder or let system, all that, because there's not actually an incentive structure for people to participate. Because, in fact, all alternative currencies are less powerful than dollars, for example. Like, I can't pay my cell phone bill with alternative currencies. I can't pay for healthcare with alternative currencies. I can't pay for building materials. A lot of things that people are actually spending money on, in fact, the way things currently are, can't be paid for with alternative currencies. But it creates a little bit of a driver for it to have a community service system linked with it. Grace is saying that's probably the longest standing community currency anywhere in the world. Yeah, that might be true. And I will say that it's also a weakness, the linking of the community service system to the leap. It's called the currency. It makes it so that it creates some strange incentive structures with community service. It essentially gets us to a point where people are trying to make sure that they check the box of doing the amount of time rather than getting the best possible outcome through their community service. For example, at the Llama Foundation, a community I visited in New Mexico, they have a stewardship-based community service system where people are responsible for different areas, like building upkeep or this garden or doing the bookkeeping or something, and people are responsible and accountable for the quality of work in those arenas. And they talk about that. Thanks, Spencer. Rather than having to be accountable for a certain number of hours, right? So it's actually a little bit unrelational in that way, our system. It's a little bit transactional in that way. That's one way it's transactional. There are other ways it's relational. But it is surviving, and it does. And the thing maybe I want to highlight, and then I'll stop talking, is what it's really good for is helping new people in the system to orient to ways they can plug in to the needs, right? People who've been in the system for a long time, we know what needs doing. It would be easier for us to steward things based on needs. But new people who are come in, who've been here like less than 5 years, it's really good to have the LEAP system and the community service system to let them know, hey, this is what needs doing, and this is how you can feel good about how much you're contributing and not worry that people are judging you for not doing enough or something. So it creates a little bit of an on-ramp. So it's an interesting thing to think about in relational economics and community-based systems, right? Is what are the on-ramps for people to get involved? It's with the trust again. We trust each other deeply once people have been here a long time, but how do we get new people up to speed with the trust? And it kind of provides that function. All right, so I'll stop talking and open it up these last few minutes for conversation, questions, discussion. Yeah, Michael.
Thanks very much for your perspective, Zeph. Very interesting.
Yeah.
What I've been trying to bring into the chat is thinking around the idea that our monetary system itself is extractive.
Right.
And so within those constraints, trying to achieve a relational economy is actually not possible. And so that's what I'm trying to get to is, should we not be paying more attention to alternative economics, considering the limitations that you mentioned? We know that they all haven't worked.
Right.
But I see an opportunity talking to wealth holders about shifting their capital out of an extractive system that is currently at risk and creating a space, where their wealth is less at risk. So the whole BioFi proposal that Samantha's put on the table, to me, looks like a good place to go, but it requires quite a bit of buy-in from various bioregions. It's a topic that's too big for here, and I certainly didn't want to hijack the conversation that we're having here, but to
Yeah.
plant the seeds, and I'm curious to find out whether there are others thinking along those lines that we have to get off this extractive monetary system.
I want to come check that presentation out. When is that one?
I would love to go there as well, Michael. That's been my theme. And for now, I'm seeing like how can we do both for now, but expanding more and more those other resources that are already with us. So what I've been working on is like how to build that coherence among us and creating that sense of trust and belonging. So then we can really start sharing not just money, but all the resources we have, the time and so on, but without coming from the transactional, coming from the gift culture.
Yeah.
So, and for the money, it would come more in that collaborative basis that you brought. And I was here doing a 4D map around that, and it came the idea of, in English, it doesn't feel it, you cannot feel the difference in language, but in Portuguese, when you say investors male is different than investors like the female, and we were saying like how can we make a big call to investors, let's say generally speaking, but who wants to support this way of living that is more integrated, that brings the earth in the center, that brings care as a basic value and trust and so on. And how can we as individuals not like support that cause? Like, okay, I'm working, I don't necessarily have time to work now for regenerative practices or for making the world better, but I can put my money there, or I can put my time there, or I can put some other resources there. And then that fund would kind of help support the system, because it isn't a system based in money. It's based in the abundance of nature. And so,
Thank
yeah,
you, Patricia.
that's
I
where
want to wrap us because we're past time here, and I think a lot of people need to go. But I appreciate you bringing in the multi-capital resources we all need to be paying attention to. And yeah, perhaps you and Michael can connect. And if you organize something, please share it in the BioFi community of practice so others can learn more about your work. I want to give folks that need to go the opportunity to go, and thank Zev for his amazing presentation and sharing so much wisdom that he's gained over his years of running Cooperate WNC and like learning from the hurricane and all these experiences that he's been through. I put some links in the chat. Zev linked to Cooperate WNC where you can learn more and get engaged if you're in the region. I put a link to the BioFi community of practice, to our next BioFi deep dive with Will Reddick and Odd Perron of Grassroots Economics. That is next month. and also a link to the upcoming Turtle Island Bioregional Congress, which will be taking place in Oregon in September. Tyler and I will be there, also many other colleagues. It's going to be a really great event. We'd love to see some of you there if you can go. And I'm happy for maybe one more question or comment, but I just wanted to wrap us at the half hour. Alan, did you wanna come in, and Zev, do you have an extra couple minutes? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Samantha. Oh, Alan, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, had to hit another button. Yeah, thank you, Zev, for
Yeah.
bringing all this in. It's been really good. As I've been working with in my model of like regenerative design, I've been working with what we call the ecosystemic economic model. You know, there's been people who said the primary economy is nature and the biosphere. That's been said before. And then the secondary economy is how humans derive goods and services that we trade. And then a lot of times people say, well, the tertiary economy is the monetary system and so forth. And as I was researching this, I actually inserted a third level between those two, and I called it the relational economy. And the reason is that looking at the history of how we as a species have, dealt with each other, it's like, what happened was when we used to have villages that were back at a human scale, we could have those trust relationships.
Right.
And so what happened was when we started to get out of human scale, we needed a proxy for trust. And so we needed to put this infrastructure on top of what I would think of as the relational economy to allow us to be transactional with people who were outside of our scope of trust. And so we built a monetary system that would allow us to trade literally across the globe, right? And when we did that, what we did is we said, well, we no longer have to have these trust relationships. We can have a legal framework that allows for us to. So this is one of the reasons that I've kind of observed that when we monetize a transaction, we sterilize it socially because we've literally quite intentionally by design extracted all of the trust from that. And so yeah, this was good for me to think another level about how our own model of the third level, the primary economy is the natural world, the secondary economy, goods and services. The third level is that relational economy, and then the monetary system is this quaternary economy that only happens when we get out of trust scale. And so I just thought I'd like to put that out there because to me it's a useful way of thinking about how we got to where we are right now in terms of people growing up without having to have any trust system involved in these in these basic transactions that support life.
Yeah, and I would say that continues to be deliberate, the stripping of trust away from the systems, because when you have trust, you have accountability, and the types of economies that we have require a lack of accountability by
Yes.
definition and by structure because they're coercive. And when people are coerced, they don't like it and they ask for accountability. So you have to violently prevent them from getting the accountability. And that's how violence and war and the economy are so interconnected with each other. So it's designed to prevent trust from accumulating because that would close the loop and bring the feedback home and require transformation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know we need to wrap it up. I think there's an interesting discussion to be had here, and there's other ways, including like licensing and certifications, where we used to have human scale trust, and we knew each other, and we knew who was, we knew who we could trust to do certain things. Today, when we get out of human scale in a city, you have licenses and certifications and degrees and all of this. Again, it strips away real person to person trust and it gives a proxy in between so that we no longer have to have those community trust relationships we used to have.
Yeah.
Mutual aid networks are an old technology that's becoming very popular again. And we're lucky to have people like Zev to learn from on this path. Thank you all for coming today. We'll put the recording on our YouTube channel if you want to share it around with folks, and we hope to see some of you next month.
Awesome. Thanks again, Samantha and Tyler.
Yeah.
Doing good stuff. See you soon.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.
Take care.